Never drive this New Mexico highway at night. I was on an assignment for the Army, making my way up from San Antonio, Texas, to Tacoma, Washington. It was a long drive, and they gave me 6 days to report to my new unit, but I didn't mind. I love road trips. There's nothing like the freedom of exploring the world by yourself. On the first day of my journey, I planned to get as much driving in as possible so I could spend a few days in Utah, a sort of mini vacation, you could say. This was January, and the days were short, so maximizing the amount of daylight I had was crucial. I got up extra early that morning, carried the last of my bags out to my Corolla, signed out of my old unit, and hit the road at roughly 5 a.m. It was an amazing day. I saw the landscape transform around me as I headed farther west than I had ever been in my life. From the San Antonio metropolitan area to the savannas of the Edwards Plateau, to the pancake flat farmland of the Great Plains region, America's breadbasket. Finally, the farms opened up into prairie, and I saw the Welcome to New Mexico, the land of enchantment sign. Now I was really in the middle of nowhere. Continuing on US Route 380, I eventually found myself in Roswell. I could have gotten a few more hours of driving in and made it to Albuquerque, but I figured since I was in no rush, I might as well see what Roswell had to offer. Who knows if I would get a chance to visit again. As a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, as Mr. Ballin would say, I took a self-guided tour of the shops and attractions. The next day, I continued to Albuquerque, then westward on Interstate 40. By the time I reached Gallup and started northbound on US Route 491, I still had 2 hours of driving left before crossing the border into Colorado, and another 45 minutes before I would get to Cortez, my planned stop for the night. However, my daylight was already running out, as sunset was at 6 p.m. I got Starbucks and refreshed myself for the final stretch. It was supposed to be easy. Just a straight shot. But looking back on it now, I figured that, had I decided to stop in Albuquerque instead of Roswell the night previous, I would have already been in Colorado by now, and possibly be making my way into Utah. I would have saved myself from what was waiting for me on that desolate highway. Route 491 stretched far into the Navajo Nation. On either side of me were endless expanses of prairie bookended by dark indigo mountains on the horizon. To my left, the sky glowed a faint orange-purple, the light slowly dying down like smoldering embers in a fire, until finally plunging the land into darkness. Now and then, I would see the forlorn headlights of another car passing by, which gave me a bit of relief that I wasn't alone. I also had my road trip playlist on to keep me company, and call me ironic, but Hotel California was playing. After passing the small, lonely town of Newcomb, the next piece of civilization would be Shiprock. However, between the two was a 36-mile stretch of absolute nothingness. An abyss I had to cross. I was not ready for what I was about to witness. After several miles, and having not seen another car on the road, I saw something strange emerge from the horizon. Barely lit by the moonlight, I thought it was a road sign at first. Then as I came closer, I realized it was a person, walking on the shoulder of the road, heading in my direction. I squinted, trying my hardest to focus on the figure. In the darkness, I could tell they were wearing a poncho of some sort, with long, black hair flowing down past their chest. Who could be walking out here, all alone, at night? I thought. Whoever it was, they had no lights, no reflectors, no strobes of any kind to signal to passing cars that they were there. And they walked on the pavement, dangerously close to oncoming traffic. I pulled to the left a bit, giving them a wide berth. Suddenly, my stereo cut out, as if I had turned it off. The screen went completely dark, and my phone disconnected from Bluetooth. While this was unusual, it certainly did happen from time to time, so I thought nothing of it. As I approached, I saw the person raise their right arm as if to flag me down and hitch a ride. Oh no, I thought. No way's happening, buddy. As my headlights swept by, I realized it was a man dressed in a button-up shirt, a wool poncho, jeans, and cowboy boots. His large belt buckle glinted as the lights passed him. But in that split second, I realized with abject shock that not only were his eyes painfully wide open, but they seemed to be tracking me. Somehow, he was able to see me through the glare of my headlights and look me dead in the eyes, not breaking contact until I passed. I was shaken for a bit, but my nerves gradually subsided. My stereo abruptly turned back on and my music continued playing. I brushed everything off as simply my imagination. The darkness and the shadows played tricks on my mind. Besides, the man was behind me. I figured he must have been drunk. Indian reservations sadly had high rates of alcoholism. I looked in my rearview mirror. He was gone. I couldn't see him. Maybe he's too far behind me? No, that couldn't be. It must be too dark. Maybe. I drove on, trying to figure out what had just happened, but at the same time, forcing myself not to think about it. Just when I thought I had moved on, I saw another shape in the distance. Getting closer, I realized it was another figure. Is another person walking alone at night? There's no way. They walked along the shoulder of the road, swaying back and forth. Slowly, I could make out that this person was also wearing a poncho. Then I saw what looked like long, black hair reaching down past the chest. No. There's no way. It was the man. The same man. But how? The man raised his arm again, trying to flag me down. What did this guy want? I kept up my pace, with no intention of stopping for any reason. Just like last time, my stereo turned off again. Suddenly, the man leaped out onto the road, arms waving frantically. I swerved into the left lane, narrowly avoiding him. In my headlights, I noticed he had the same wide-eyed look, his gaze locked onto mine. I also saw that his clothes did not look as they did in the first encounter. Once they were clean, if not well worn, but now they were soiled and tattered, rags barely hanging onto his withered frame. His hair was wild and unkempt, with clods of dried dirt stuck in the locks. But his eyes remained the same. My heart nearly burst through my chest at the sudden shock. Hyperventilating, I slowed down and glanced into the rearview mirror to make sure he was all right. Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. The man was running. He was sprinting towards me. I centered the wheel and accelerated, hoping to get as much distance from him as possible. But as I continued to speed up, so did he. Faster and faster I drove, but every time I looked in the mirror, I would still see him right behind me, perfectly keeping pace, his body tinted red by my tail lights. I could feel my temples throbbing and my hands getting slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I was sick to my stomach. There's no way. I looked forward, hoping to see a faint glimmer of light from the town ahead. But I was still too far away. I looked back at the rearview mirror. The man was gone. I should have been relieved, but I knew better. Where did he go? I looked around, hoping to regain a visual of him. I couldn't see anything. Taking a deep breath, I refocused on the road but kept my guard up. Just keep driving, I told myself. Only a few more miles to go. Out of the corner of my right eye, I saw something. Another shape. It wasn't the man, at least, I didn't think so. I glanced over, bracing myself for whatever was going to meet my sight. It looked like an animal. Some kind of animal, though I couldn't make out exactly what it was. Under the moonlight, I could see it running alongside my car, its forelimbs reaching out in long strides, its back undulating like a dog. Closer and closer it came. The closer it was, the more of it I could see. Little by little. Then I noticed its limbs were far too long for its body. Its body was too short. It had no tail. The head was oddly round, and from it came a trail of long, black hair. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my car's engine harder than it had ever been pushed before. By now I was clocking well over 110 miles per hour. But this creature, it kept up. It wasn't fazed. It simply ran faster and faster to match my speed. Just what was this thing? How could anyone or anything run this fast? The entity seemed to have endless stamina. Just how long could it keep this up? Just how much faster could it go? Soon, my car would hit its top speed. And then what? How long could it maintain that before breaking down? It wouldn't be long until my engine overheats. But regardless, I would eventually run out of gas. And when I do, what would happen if that thing got me? At 120 miles per hour, my car had reached its limit. This was the fastest I could go. But the creature continued its pursuit. My temperature gauge was approaching the red, and so was my tachometer. I couldn't keep this up any longer. Suddenly, like the beacon of a lighthouse on a tumultuous sea, the first light of Shiprock came into view. It was close. So close. If I could just go a little longer, I could make it into town. To safety. I pressed on. I fixed my eyes on the lights, growing brighter on the horizon. They bloomed outwards, glimmering in the night air. Though it was a small town, it was a sight for sore eyes in my situation. Looking in my periphery, I saw the undulation of the creature's spine as it kept pace with my car. But now, it was slipping away, steering farther and farther from the road. It suddenly hit me just how hard my heart was beating. Beads of sweat dripped down my face. I looked over. The creature was gone. But this time, the feeling of dread had also gone with it. My stereo once again turned back on, and as my music resumed, I breathed a deep sigh of relief. I let off the accelerator. The creature, whatever it was finally gone for good. Having white-knuckled the steering wheel the whole time without realizing it, my hands were extremely sore. But I was glad to have made it through. A week later, I told another soldier in my unit about what I had experienced. Being originally from Albuquerque, she was familiar with the Native American legends of the Southwest. The conversation steered toward a certain creature that she would not dare speak the name of. She also told me that the highway I took was well known for all sorts of paranormal phenomena. Google what Route 491 used to be called, and everything will make sense. Be careful out there. If you drive to Texas, don't do it at night. A week or so ago, I was driving down to Texas. It was a long drive, one that would take 2 days unless I drove nonstop throughout the night. However, I was eager to reach my destination and I chose to tough it out for the sake of getting there sooner. The drive started relatively normal. I drove for a couple of hours south and I felt good. I had my music cranked and a cooler full of energy drinks in the passenger seat. When I saw the sign saying, "Now entering Tennessee," I thought I was making record time. I must have forgotten to watch the clock though, because the sun began to set. I was partially confused, mainly because I had left earlier in the day, but I disregarded it as the idle distractions I created for myself to pass the time faster being the cause. Something else odd I noticed was the open freeway. Normally I would expect to see many vehicles all traveling to different places, but instead, I seemed to be the only one out and about. Still, I wasn't feeling tired and I had already committed to driving straight through the night even if things seemed strange. But, as I drove on, I realized that the sun had set far too quickly, and with the lack of vehicles on the road, it looked like I was driving in a void. The blackened world around me was only illuminated by my high beams, but I could only see perhaps 15 feet ahead of me. There were a few normalities like guardrails and mile markers, but if something were to appear in front of me, I'd likely hit it because of my lack of visibility. So, I pulled over. My vehicle came to a subtle halt on the side of the freeway, and I turned on my emergency lights. Realistically, I knew it wasn't a fog, it was just dark, darker than the world behind my eyelids. I suppose I wanted to see another car pass by before I concluded that something had gone wrong. But none came. I waited for more than 20 minutes and not one car or truck barreled down the freeway. I decided to roll my window down and allow some fresh air into my car. Plus, I was slightly panicking because I did have somewhere to be and this was taking up precious time. Suddenly, the engine shut off. Even the accessory power had gone cold. I performed some percussive maintenance by smacking my hand against the dash as if it would magically fix everything, but it didn't. Then, I heard a quiet ticking sound. You know the sound your fingers make when you tap them against the table? It was like that, but instead of the soft fleshy contact you'd get from the skin of your digits, it was more like the clicking of nails against plastic. My intuition told me it was coming from under the hood and therefore I'd have to step outside. But, just as I was about to open the door, I almost had a heart attack because hanging over the trim of the window sill was a hand. I freaked out and flung myself into the passenger seat on top of my cooler. The hand was tapping its pale white fingers against the inner part of my door, and after my initial fears died down, I thought that it may have been someone looking to help me. Foolish, I know, but I did have my 4 ways on. A part of me knew full well that another vehicle hadn't pulled up behind mine while I was distracted by the engine malfunction, but I still inquired, "Hello, who's there?" The fingers stopped moving and the hand slipped down slowly over the side of the door out of sight. I waited while trying to catch my breath before asking again, "Hey, who's there? Why are you messing with me?" No sound, not even crickets responded to me. I turned my head to peer out of the rear window and couldn't see anything, which made me wonder more as to who was outside of my car. My ear was pressed against the passenger window, and just as I was about to slide back into the driver's seat, I heard the tapping a second time right next to my ear. I nearly got whiplash from the speed at which I turned my head to look out of the window. There wasn't anything there, in terms of a tapping hand. However, there were fingerprints left in the condensation on the outside of the glass. My heart raced and I crawled back into the driver's seat and tried to stupidly roll the window up, even though I quickly realized that was futile. Then, I started to hear footsteps in the gravel on the side of the asphalt, but when I looked in my mirrors, I saw nothing. That was until my headlights came on without warning. They flashed brightly ahead of me and illuminated the figure of a human standing directly in the light. But I couldn't see who it was because they were missing their head. The headless torso held out its thumb as if it were hitchhiking. However, it only did so for a moment before beginning to approach my vehicle. I tried to start the engine, but for some reason, my key wouldn't crank, and then I thought, if the headlights are on, then surely I should be able to at least roll the window up. It moved slowly, the body that is, towards me with a shambling, unstable gait. Unfortunately for me, my window wouldn't go up, even when fiddling with the key in the ignition. I started to panic and sweat began forming on the palms of my hands. By the time it was at the front corner of the driver's side, I decided I would get out and confront it. As I reached for the door handle and pulled, I found that it wouldn't open. I have one of those stupid pull-up locks that sink into the door, so I wasn't able to grip it and force it up. The electronic unlock didn't work either, so my only option was to climb out of the window. The problem was that it had already reached my side mirror. There was no way I would be able to crawl through the window without that thing grabbing me, so once again I slid into the passenger seat with my feet poised to kick if it tried to worm its unnatural way inside. From there I could see it was a masculine body that was exceedingly tall, and it wore a gray sweatshirt laden with holes. It had scuffed pants with tread marks denoting a tire had crossed over them at ludicrous speed. If I had to guess, I'd say they had been run over. As it tried to reach its arm inside, I kicked it away. It didn't appear to have much more than primal instinct because it stumbled back and took some time to regain itself. Still, even though it was a brainless walking corpse, I was terrified. When it reached inside the second time, I scooted myself towards the driver's seat and forcibly jammed my foot against its chest, sending it falling to the ground. I used the opportunity to get out of the car via the open window and run around to the trunk. I couldn't open it without the key, which I had stupidly left inside, but at least I could get away. But, as it rose to its feet, I felt an immense pressure in my head as if someone were squeezing my brain. My vision became blurry and different parts of my body burned with a fiery intensity. Every time I tried to move one of my limbs, I couldn't, and the paralysis weaving its way throughout my body made me an easy target. The headless torso continued shuffling its disjointed feet in my direction with an outstretched hand, but the other was held low with its thumb out. Suddenly, my faculties snapped back into my control, and I was able to avoid its mindless descent by stepping to the other side of my vehicle. I don't know what made me think the car would start if I tried again, but despite my former failures, I awkwardly jumped inside and turned the key. My eyes widened with joy when the engine turned over, followed by the familiar rumbling of the vehicle running. I threw the shifter into drive, slammed my foot on the gas without hesitation, and sped off into the dark. I thought I was in the clear, and my breathing slowly returned to normal. It was odd that some strange part of me thought that maybe it was just a ghost that was asking for help, but that was highly improbable, and now I know that wasn't the case. The freeway was still obscured by the all-encompassing darkness, but I didn't care. I just kept driving. Then my heart skipped a beat because standing on the side of the road was the headless person. I drove by but couldn't see them in my rearview mirror due to the darkness. I took a breath and drove on without trying to think about it too much, while taking a look at my clock to see what time it was. It read midnight. Great, I said aloud, still maintaining a relatively high speed. My hands were firmly gripping the steering wheel, and I kept thinking it was over, but I was wrong again. Like before, I saw the body standing adjacent to the freeway with an outstretched thumb. It started walking into the road as if it were trying to be hit. I avoided it and continued completely freaked out. I took a peek in my rearview mirror and I could have sworn it was sitting in my back seat, but as I quickly glanced over my shoulder, it was just an empty seat. My paranoia was somewhat satiated when I saw it again, but now it was holding something in the hand that didn't have its thumb out. As I drove by, I narrowed my eyes to see it closer. It was holding a smiling head. At this point, I was close to fainting from the fear. I just wanted this horror loop to end, but as that thought crossed my mind, I heard something heavy fall onto the roof of my car. I jumped in my seat, startled by the sound, and looked up. Obviously, I couldn't see anything, but I could hear movement and I could sense the weight lurking above. Regrettably, during all the chaos, I had still forgotten to roll the window up, which I admit was entirely my fault, much to my dismay. I say that because the sound suddenly stopped and I thought it was over once again, but when I looked to my left, I was met face to face with the severed head. The body was on the roof, holding the head in my open window. I yelled and it tossed the head inside and it latched onto my thigh, biting deeply into my muscle. It laughed maniacally and I nearly crashed, trying to deal with both the head and keeping my vehicle on the road. I yelled out in pain and began pounding my fist against the back of my head. Luckily, one of my attacks dislodged it from my leg and I grabbed onto it with my free hand before throwing it out of the window. All at once the darkness lifted and I was able to see the head bouncing down the freeway in my mirror, followed by the body it belonged to sliding off my roof only to tumble on the road. I was breathing so hard I thought I might lose consciousness and my leg was bleeding pretty badly, but I dared not stop. I started to see other vehicles, and that's when I finally allowed myself to feel any sort of relief. The events I had experienced shocked my system and I decided I would pull off at the nearest town and get a motel for the rest of the night. When I found one, the lady at the counter said, "Your face is so pale. Are you okay?" I looked deeply into her eyes and said, "There was a man, or rather, a body on the freeway, without a head. It terrorized me and nearly killed me." She stared at me for a moment before bursting into laughter. "Oh, you young people. You always have the craziest stories, although I do seem to remember someone else saying something about a body on the freeway once." My eyes lit up. "What did they say? What happened to them?" "Well, nothing happened. We called the police, but they found no bodies, nor did they find any evidence of an accident. The person ended up leaving the next morning, and that was that." "Huh," I uttered softly. I got a room for the night and addressed my wound. It wasn't as bad as I originally thought. It must have been the lighting that made it look worse. I stayed until around early morning and then checked out with barely any sleep. Now I'm telling you to avoid driving down any freeway if you're going to Texas. I mean, I can't say for sure what the catalyst is, but something to do with MY's specific trip caused me to experience this horrific anomaly, and I just want to warn everyone I can. Although the lady at the counter did say someone else experienced something similar. I just don't know, and it's better to be safe than sorry. What's even worse is that when I was about to get into my car to continue my drive south, I noticed a fresh handprint pressed firmly against the outside of my driver's window. I guess I'll be sticking to day driving from now on. My mom went out for a drive and came back, different. I don't think she is my mom anymore. "Hey honey, I'm thinking of heading out for a drive. Care to join me?" my mother's voice echoed. Glancing up, I responded, "Thanks Mom, but I think I'll pass." "Where are you headed?" "I thought I'd take that scenic route through the forest by Rockefeller Mountain," she replied with a hint of excitement. "All right, have fun," I said. With a gentle kiss on my cheek, my mother departed. I sat there, listening as the hum of the car's engine faded into the distance. Settling into the couch, I grabbed some snacks from the fridge and began mindlessly watching an old war film. The movie, combined with the coziness of the couch, gradually pulled me to sleep. As quickly as I fell asleep, An insistent vibration of my phone jerked me back to consciousness. Rubbing my eyes, I picked it up and was met with a series of missed call notifications, all from my mom. I tried returning her calls, but each attempt was met with her voicemail. Glancing at the clock, it read 10:48 p.m. She'd left at precisely 3:23 p.m. No drive, especially on that trail, would take that long. A storm of thoughts began to rage in my head, each more worrisome than the last. Had she gotten lost? Had the car broken down? Or was it something worse? As these scenarios whirled around in my mind, a sharp, sudden sound pierced through the air, the ring of the doorbell. I sprang from the couch, feet pounding the wooden floor as I raced to the door. The narrow view through the peephole revealed the face of my mother, but something was off. Her eyes, usually so full of warmth, seemed distant, almost hollow. Swinging the door open, my voice was a mix of relief and frustration. "Where have you been all this time?" She met my gaze, those unsettlingly vacant eyes seeming to peer right through me. Silent, she brushed past me with an air of detachment, making her way to her room without uttering a word. The next day was somewhat normal. I found her in the kitchen, going through the familiar routine of preparing breakfast, but there was a change in her demeanor. Our usual conversations were absent, replaced by silence. As I readied myself for work, I tried to bridge the gap. "Hey Mom, I'm heading off to work. See you later." All I received was a nod, a silent acknowledgement, leaving a cold space where her usual warm response would be. I got off of work late, and I pulled into the driveway around 2 or 3 a.m. Trying not to make a sound, I crept into the house, not wanting to wake my mom. I tiptoed through the dimly lit halls towards the kitchen to grab some snacks and take them to my room. But when I flicked on the kitchen light, there she was, my mom, standing still, staring out the window towards our backyard. The sight took me aback. "Mom? Why are you up? What are you looking at?" I waited for a reply, but silence hung in the air. Shrugging it off, I said, "Work was all right today. Left a bit early after some friends took off." While grabbing my stuff from the fridge, I couldn't help but ask, "You okay, Mom?" She answered, still staring out at the yard, "Yes, okay." The way she spoke was odd. It was too upbeat, like she was thrilled about something. It didn't fit the moment at all. It was just off. Grabbing my snacks, I headed straight to my room, leaving the kitchen lights on for her. Morning came with the familiar smell of breakfast. On weekends, Mom would cook since there was no rush for work. I headed downstairs, calling out, "Good morning." I grabbed some juice and sat. She replied cheerily, "Good morning, sweetie," looking like her usual self. She asked about work and how I slept. I wanted to remind her we'd talked the night before, but I didn't. I repeated what I'd said, and she acted like it was new information. We chatted more, then settled to eat. As I sliced into my pancakes, something caught my eye. I pulled out a tiny, gleaming sewing needle from the soft center. My heart raced as I held it up, asking, "Mom, what's this?" I held the needle aloft, the sharp point catching the light. "This was in my pancakes," I stammered. Looking at it, her face reflected genuine concern. She hurriedly assured me, "I'm so sorry. I'd never want to hurt you." Truly. Her embrace was warm and comforting. "Don't eat any more of that. I'll whip up a new one." Her words almost made me feel guilty for suspecting her. It was just so bizarre that doubt naturally crept in. The day proceeded without another hitch. Laughter, movies, gossip, and our ritualistic goodnight capped it off. I climbed into bed around 10:30 p.m. As a kid, I had a paralyzing fear of the dark. To combat this, my mom had placed 2 nightlights, one in my room and another in the hallway. Though my room was now devoid of light, the hallway still had its comforting glow. Awakening for a sip of water, I froze. The glow from under my door was intermittently obscured. A shadow. Someone stood there. Stifling my breath, I watched it for what felt like an eternity, the shadow unwavering. "Mom?" I said softly. There was no reply. Instead, the shadow receded, gliding silently towards her room. Morning found me weary. The haunting shadow, the weight of eyes on me, made sleep impossible. I confronted her at breakfast. "Mom, were you outside my room? Around 3 a.m.? She evaded the question. Instead, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "Do you remember letting me brush your curls when you were little? Let's do that now." Beside the sink, conditioner and a brush awaited. Recent events screamed caution, but this was my mom. I relented, sinking into the familiarity of her touch. As she worked on my tangles, time melted away. Our conversation continued as she rinsed my hair. But as I was talking, I suddenly felt a hard grip tighten on my hair. Without warning, my head was forced into the water filling the sink. Panic overtook me. I was being drowned. It's surprising how weak you feel in a situation like this, with your mind racing and someone using their entire weight to hold you down by the back of your head. My arms flailed, at times trying to push myself up using the edges of the kitchen counter. After what felt like an eternity, the grip was released. Gasping and coughing, I pulled my head out of the water and spun around to confront my mother. "What the fuck are you doing?" I yelled while trying to make sense of what just happened. That was the first time I cussed at my mom, but I mean, what the actual hell? She started laughing, pointing at me with one hand while the other kept slapping her knee. "I got you. You should have seen your face." Staring in shock, my displeasure was clear enough that her laughter faded, replaced by a look of concern. "Come on, don't be upset. It was just a joke." She stepped closer, arms open for a hug. I quickly sidestepped, keeping my distance between us, a wary expression evident on my face. I was genuinely afraid. That wasn't the kind of joke my mother would make. She'd never take a prank to such extremes, certainly not one that could hurt me. It was at this moment I realized something was off about her. I began to doubt if she was my mother at all. From then on, I became distant. Our conversations were minimal, only out of necessity. I began to avoid meals, spending more time locked in my room. Those eerie nights when she'd stand outside my door persisted. It was like clockwork, always around the same hour. And every night, after a while, the shadow would recede. I grew more anxious, opting to leave the house frequently, taking refuge at friends' places just to avoid being home with her. She stopped going to work altogether. During the day, she'd be in the backyard, engaged in strange activities, digging random holes, thrusting a trowel into the ground, or just standing there, seemingly talking to herself, though I could never make out the words. However, last night's event will forever be etched in my memory. Before drifting to sleep, I recall praying for an uninterrupted night's rest. The mere sight of her shadow under my door had become a haunting and fearsome nightly ordeal. I found myself jolted awake in the pitch blackness of my room. Reluctantly, I shifted my gaze to the bottom of my door. As I feared, her shadow was there. She was standing just outside, silent as ever. I tried to force myself back to sleep, but given the circumstances, sleep eluded me. Then, something different occurred. A knock. 7 soft, deliberate knocks. After the knocks, silence consumed the room. Lying there, fear paralyzed me. What was different tonight? Why did she decide to knock now? A chilling thought struck me. My door didn't have a lock. It never did, even from my childhood. The last semblance of a barrier between us wasn't even secured. The eerie knocks resumed, more insistent this time. Knock, 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 knock. Reacting instinctively, I pulled the covers over my head, clinging to those childhood beliefs of safety. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't protect me now. The sound of the door creaking open made my heart pound harder. I braced myself, waiting for the sound of footsteps, but there were none. Had she retreated? Or was she just standing there, watching? Minutes dragged on in terrifying silence. Then, suddenly, there was a rapid, scuttling noise. It sounded impossibly fast, moving from the floor to the walls, to the ceiling. The entire room echoed with it. Blind terror overcame me, thoughts racing uncontrollably. Is she crawling on all fours? How is she moving so fast? What is she doing? Am I going to die? These fears consumed me until darkness took over. Whether from stress or sheer panic, I lost consciousness. Gratefully, it spared me from whatever horror unfolded that night. When morning light finally greeted me, my room was a mess, everything thrown into chaos. It was nowhere in sight. Did it leave? Is it in the house still? These questions remain unanswered. Gathering my courage, I finally left the safety of my bed and managed to prop a chair against the door for some semblance of security. I'm at a loss for what to do next or whom to turn to. But one thing is certain, I can't spend another night here. The house has been eerily silent since I woke up. I'm preparing to remove the chair and make a break for it. So far, there's been no sound outside my door, which I hope means the coast is clear. I am an Uber driver and my last client was not normal. Growing up, I heard many stories of demons and angels as I grew up in a very religious household. But that is not relevant to my first encounter with a demon. I am an Uber driver, so I often bring young kids home from the bar on a late Friday night. This was like every other stop that I have had as an Uber driver. I pulled up outside of a popular nightclub and my client opened the passenger side door. It was odd that he sat up front. Most people just get in the back. His ride was a bit farther than the normal distance that I like to travel, but it was close to my home and it was almost 3 a.m., so I was about done for the night. After he got in, I started to head towards his destination, roughly 31 m away. I typically like to make small talk with my passengers, and I looked in his direction and noticed that he was dressed very formally for your typical nightclub kid. He was probably around 27 and 6 feet 3 inches, and his face seemed to be quite handsome. So in an attempt to start some small talk, I asked him, "So did you have a good night, Kyle?" I got his name from Uber when I picked him up. "Not terrible, I got what I needed, but hoped that I would receive more," he said in a deep but very reassuring voice. I don't know how to describe this, but it felt very trustworthy. Similar to a fatherly-like tone. "How has your night been? Had any interesting encounters tonight?" he said. No, not for me, I replied, showing him my wedding ring. 18 years happy and counting, I responded. He waited for a moment and said, is that true? Did you not cheat on your wife Samantha 3 years ago after a fight that you had about money because she lost her job? I looked at the GPS and it said 26M. I am not sure what you are talking about, I replied with a stern tone in my voice. I increased the volume of the music on my steering wheel. This was not possible. I must just be hearing things since it was so late. No one knows that I had an affair and it was a mistake. He must have just had a really good guess, I thought. Would it cause you despair if she found out? He said there would be nothing to find out because that didn't happen and we are happy, I replied. True, it wouldn't make much of a difference because she has been aware since early last year. Stephanie works at the new firm that she works at. I never understood how humans forgive each other for such betrayal, a truly despicable quality. We hit a stoplight and I slammed on the brakes and exclaimed loudly, "Who the fuck are you? What do you want from me?" Visibly angry at this time. Glancing at the GPS, 18M until arrival. The man took a moment to straighten himself in his seat after the sudden stop. Please refrain from outbursts of anger. I have no use for anger. What I am interested in is your sins, he said, almost sounding annoyed. He was supposed to be the one who was annoyed in this situation. So then, what do you want? What do I have to give you to leave me and my family alone? I said. He smiled a large smile. I do not want anything from you. I would much prefer to make a deal instead if you are interested, he said. It doesn't feel like I have much choice. What kind of deal do you want? I glanced at the time, 11 minutes until arrival. What I want is your sins, he said with a slur like a snake. You want my sins? What does that even mean? You want me to confess to you like some kind of priest? I replied, only getting angrier. Quite the opposite. I would like you to commit sins in my name and I will reward you equivalently to the sin that you have committed. How does that sound? I checked the time, 3 minutes left. I just wanted this crazy man out of my car at this point and just wanted to keep him talking so that I could drop him off and head home. Yeah, sure, can you give me the rest of the details and I will give you all of my sins, I said in an overly dramatic tone. The man smiled ear to ear. Great. This makes my night a good night, sir. If you accept, please take my card and keep it with you as you commit your sins. It would be even better if you said my name as it is printed on the card when you do it. I will visit you again next year at this time to collect. I should also mention, if I return and I am not satisfied with what you have to offer me, I will take something else as payment and never visit you again. I then pulled up to the location where he requested to be dropped off. It was just an old 24-hour diner just off the highway. You sure, Kyle, we're here, so get out, I said. Wonderful, he said as he placed a card on my seat as he got out, and I peeled out of there. The next year was rather difficult for me. I hit a man with my car by accident, killing him. I then became quite the alcoholic, and this affected my marriage. My wife and I had another fight, and I ended up spending the night at a hotel with a lady of the night. I stepped outside the hotel for a smoke. Another bad habit that I had picked up along the way. I lit my cigarette and took a puff when I heard a familiar voice. Marvelous, my new attendant of sin. I truly did not expect products such as this from you, Kyle said in an almost overjoyed tone. Manslaughter, infidelity, addiction, and neglect. I never imagined that you would produce such fruits. For such miraculous contributions to myself, I will grant you 3 rewards. What can I do for you in return for such quality sins? I stumbled back, almost dropping my cigarette. What the hell? How? What? What? What are you doing here? How did you find me? What are you talking about? I yelled. Why, whatever do you mean? It is 3:31 a.m. on the same day as the last as I said I would return. I am here to collect and reward just as I promised. A demon never goes back on his word. Now tell me what it is that you wish for in reward as part of our deal. He replied, Wait, you're a demon? I said, Indeed I am, specifically a demon that needs sins, and you are going to give me some quite valuable sins. Now what would you like as your reward so that I may collect your sins? Wait, hold up, what do you mean? I never kept you card shit, I almost completely forgot about you. Just leave me alone and get away from me. I yelled at him. He then looked down at the ground and I felt very uneasy. Even though he was standing several parking spaces away from me, I felt very unsafe. Do you remember what I told you would happen if you did not fulfill your end of our arrangement? And you did keep my card. It has been in your car this entire time. You never got rid of it, and that means that you accepted our deal. The very car that you committed these very sins. I will take from you the equivalent of what I am owed today if you do not agree. I started to speak, but he began to walk towards me and cut me off. Have you ever heard the human saying, do not write checks that you cannot cash? He was standing right in front of me now and looked me in the eyes. I could see his eyes were pitch black, consuming any light that was around them. I will ask you once more, do you wish to select your payment or would you rather I take mine? He said this in a deep bellow that sent shivers down my spine. I stumbled back and almost pissed myself. He was very serious. I was terrified of him and I had no idea what he was going to do. So I screamed, Yes. Yes. But I don't know what I want. Please just leave me alone. Kyle then calmed a bit, spoke in a much calmer tone. Well, you do have great sins to offer, but since you bear such fruit, I can't exactly just let you go. The sins you will produce in the future are worth much more to me than that. I can also not influence your decision. You must make it, and my patience is wearing thin. Thinking fast, I just blurted out what came to my mind as I was terrified and just wanted him to leave his eyes. I swear to you that they were the most unnatural thing that I had ever seen. Like he had black holes where his eyes should be. So I just said the first three things that came to my mind. Money, safety, and health. Now please just go. Kyle smiled and his eyes went back to normal. Very well. I will grant you money, safety, and health in exchange for your sins. Please let this be easier next year. I then blinked and I woke up in my bed at home with my wife. The demon kept true to his words. No one remembered the sins that I committed that the demon had taken from me that night. Everyone forgot about the man that I hit with my car. I felt no need to drink or smoke. My wife forgot all about the fight that we had the other night. He also made true his rewards, as he called them. That same day, a bank account with $10 million in it was opened in my name. My body became athletic and I probably lost 65 pounds overnight. I was in sheer awe at everything that had happened. I fell down the stairs that morning because I was too bewildered to realize that I had missed a step. When I hit the bottom and got back up, I felt no pain, not even a bruise. Kyle, or his real name that I came to learn later, Calcifer, would visit me every year to collect my sins and make them as if they never happened, and would then reward me for it. It has been almost 55 years since I met Calcifer in the passenger seat of my Uber. I have committed many sins in his name. I have yet to disappoint him yet, and I do not want to find out what happens if I do. But the one thing that I know for sure, Once you make a deal with the devil, there is no turning back. All of these deals are eternal. I have now lived for over 100 years. My wife died 8 years ago. I am getting old again, and I will no longer request youth as a gift from Calcifer. At first, I thought this was a great deal. I could do anything with no consequences. But year after year, he continues to take my sins and slowly takes my emotions along with it. I will continue to fulfill my end of this deal until I die. I no longer wish to live. There is no point, because without knowing, Calcifer took something that I didn't know I even had. The ability to make mistakes in my life is almost completely without consequence. I no longer even know what the difference between right and wrong is. There is no point to anything anymore. Demons will take things you didn't even know that you had to lose. Never make a deal with a demon. You never know what they take in return. Driving alone. Driving alone at night, with the moon hovering over you and the radio keeping you awake, you find yourself anxious. An odd gut feeling that makes you uneasy in this solitary journey across the country's forgotten paths. The sound of the engine, an endless roar in the night, echoes against the tree lines at your sides. The fresh air of this spring night helps you to maintain focus on the road, preventing your mind from wandering off from the pavement and the fading yellow lines. This trip should end in a few more hours. You should arrive home safe, before dawn, with some time left to sleep in your comfortable bed. You can almost feel the mattress against your back, the soft pillows holding your head, and the warmth of the covers. But the very end, when you drive past an abandoned car. You glance back through the rearview mirror but can't see anyone around. The sight is an entirely unsettling thought. You have stopped on the road before, leaving your vehicle a moment to get deeper into the trees for privacy. Anyone could have an emergency, so you shrug it off and continue onward. A couple of songs later, you spot a motorcycle in the middle of the road, fallen on its side, a backpack left open, and several items scattered on the ground. You ease on the speed, peeking through the open window to check for any wounded people. You see no one there. You don't notice any blood. Still, your foot tenses onto the throttle, and you speed up, driving away from that scene. You shift on the seat, frowning, chewing on the inside of your cheeks, your hands clutching to the steering wheel. What are the odds of finding a car and a bike in such conditions? The first one still doesn't feel weird, the motorbike, though. No one leaves a vehicle like that. You can't recall hearing of any dangerous animals in the area, which would have been a valid reason to leave all your belongings behind to save your life. Turning off the radio, you find the music too distracting at the moment. Your instincts tell you to stay sharp while your mind tries to convince you that everything is all right, that you're almost home. With the sound of the engine and your haunting thoughts, you continue to drive, avoiding looking anywhere but ahead. It's a stupid fear. Yes, it is fear now, not just nervousness or anxiousness. You are scared. More and more, your reasoning part overcomes your will to keep yourself calm, and you whimper at the discovery of yet another vehicle ahead of you. An SUV, flashing lights on, bright and yellow. The 4 doors are open, and it's blocking the opposite hand of the road. You can hear a dog barking, making your heart skip a beat and get stuck in your throat. Lightheaded, you slow down, sluggishly turning to find a golden retriever tied to the back seat, struggling to set itself free. You start crying now because you are too terrified to stop, leave your car, and help that poor dog. And yet, should you stop? Turn around? Locate one of those godforsaken motels and call the police. The barking is torturing you. You look away, groaning, cursing yourself for being such a coward while you hit the gas and run away. There's no explanation for this, for anything. Coincidences are one thing, but this. You must be dreaming. That's it. You're having a terrible nightmare. You've fallen asleep on the shoulder of the road. You'll eventually wake up and laugh like an idiot. You wish you were sleeping, crying hysterically, making it hard to see and breathe, but you won't stop. Nothing will make you slow down until you're at home. Safe. Sobbing, you wash the tears off your face, rubbing your swollen eyes with a hand while keeping the car under control. You're going faster than you should, yet you don't care. If there weren't any police officers around to find 3 abandoned vehicles, no one would see you pass the speed limit tonight. Blinking a few times to clear your view, you distinguish a shape in front of you. It looks like a person, skinny, tall. Before you can start slowing down, the silhouette disappears into the woods, and you cling desperately to that steering wheel. Your foot is glued to that pedal, the engine feeling almost like your heartbeat. Immediately you feel watched from behind the trees, from where that person ran off to. From the other side too. From the back seat of your car. You don't dare to move your eyes off the road. You can't bring yourself to release the wheel for an instant to turn the radio on again. The silence outside and the yelling inside you driving you mad, and you can't see the end of this trip. You question your sanity, your luck, and your religion time and time again. The words sleeping, nightmare, crazy, and home repeat in your mind in between your frantic thoughts. And there's that person again, running at the side of the car. Are they running? You can't hear steps, but you can glimpse their pale mass, keeping up with you. They're merely a few feet apart, and they're fast. So fast. You acknowledge that presence with your peripheral sight, only able to notice the naked, white-grayish skin, and you scream, stepping on the gas until it feels like the engine is going to explode. But as you attempt to escape, you recognize a police car. Your throat tears with each scream for help when you watch how the policemen stop, stepping out, guns in their hands. You blink once. They're gone. Only their car was left, surrounded now by more of these persons. Because they are people. They must be. You keep telling yourself that. They stare at you with massive, black eyes, hands extending toward you. You yell and cry, knowing you are next. Sure that you will soon be dead, or worse. Horror and terror are nothing compared to what you feel now. Without even stopping the car, you are yanked off, dragged by an unseen force, and pulled up to the skies. You observe your car crashing against the police vehicle. You can't hear your broken voice anymore. You are cold, trembling, going higher and higher. You see fire beneath, and you sense how the air leaves your lungs, how it's getting harder and harder to breathe. You are drowning outside of the water. The cold is unbearable, your chest aches, your head spins, and you can't see anymore. You can't hear or feel your pulse anymore. Deserted highway. I'm a 15-year-old female and my sister is 23. For the sake of this story and privacy, let's call me Maddie and my sister Izzy. One day, to congratulate me on getting high scores on one of my recent tests, she said we were gonna go on a road trip over the weekend to this water park resort that had just opened up. Friday comes along and she comes to pick me up from school. Our bags are already packed and in the trunk, so we head out. To give some context, I live in a decently sized city near Lake Ontario, but once you're driving for more than 30 minutes you are surrounded by nothing but long stretches of road and large wooded areas. At this point, the sun was setting and we'd been driving for more than 3 hours when she said she needed to stop and get gas, and there was a pit stop sign a couple miles back that she saw. Around 4 to 5 minutes later, I start to see it in the distance, and it looks nearly deserted and barely lit. To my dismay, it was open, or so we thought, because it had an open sign on the door, so we pulled into the lot and my sister told me to wait in the car. She left the car and started walking up to the little down gas station door, but got to the door and suddenly stopped. I remember my sister looking back at me and looking confused, so I went to open the door and she yelled across the lot for me to stay inside. Out of nowhere, I see this creepy-looking middle-aged man emerge from the bushes on the side of the building and start to approach my sister. My sister and I have been through some things in our lives, and she is very protective of me, so she immediately tensed up and I saw her hands make a tight fist behind her back. I am too far away to hear what this man is saying to her, but my sister looks rather confused and skeptical at first, but then eases up and looks at me and smiles. She then started following the man to this dark area not too far behind our car. I then realized there was a van there that I'd never noticed before. In my mind, I was thinking, why on earth would she be following this creepy man to a van in the dead of night, but I trusted her judgment and went on my phone. There was no service, so I began watching old videos on my phone. I didn't notice that 5 minutes had passed, and I looked up thinking what was taking so long, and I felt my heart nearly fall in the pit of my stomach. It was my sister staring at me on the other side of the passenger side window. We both started to burst out laughing, and I felt myself calm down. Not too far behind her, I saw the man pouring gas into the car with a red gas can. After around 3 minutes of chatting outside the car, my sister bid him a good night and got in the car. She then explained that when she walked up to the gas station and saw no one in there, and when the man approached her he said he worked there, but had just locked up the shop. He then offered some gas for free since he had some extra in his trunk, and they just so happened to strike up a conversation. I thought his story was a bit weird, but I ignored it, so we got back on the road. Around an hour and a half later driving, we hit this long stretch of road on the GPS that's around 12 miles long, and around 2 miles down the road, I started to see flashing headlights not too far ahead, so I asked Izzy if she was seeing that, and she said yes, so we start slowing down as we're getting close. We start pulling up to the car, and Lord behold, it's that van again, and that same gas station worker steps out and starts walking up to my side of the window. I was a little skeptical and confused about how he got ahead of us, and we only stopped at a diner for around 15 to 20 minutes, so how close behind us was he? I dismissed these thoughts and cracked the window just enough to hear him speak, and he greets me and my sister again and says he popped his front left tire on some glass in the road and needed help. Being the good person my sister is, she immediately offered her assistance and told me to get out and grab her toolbox from the trunk. As I'm about to reach for the door handle, I pause. Have you ever gotten that gut-wrenching feeling of despair, or that something wrong to the point where you can't ignore it? Well, that's an understatement to how I felt. I stopped, and I don't know how long I was stuck in place there. It felt like hours, but was probably more than 45 seconds. My eyes then glance over at his car, and I see his tire. It was not flat at all. It looked like it may have been recently filled, so why would he say his front left tire was completely flat? I now sensed that my terrible feeling was right, so I look up at him, and he's smiling down at me. This wasn't the normal smile anymore. He was looking like he was hungry for me, like he craved seeing me in pain. It was such a wolfish grin, and it felt like my heart stopped due to fear. As I'm about to turn around and try to tell my sister, my neck instantly jerks to the side and hits the window, and for a moment my head hurts and I don't know what happened. I opened my eyes and I could see my sister looking panicked and the cars moving extremely fast. She had sped off quicker than I had ever seen her drive before. Minutes later, when we were driving and I stopped hyperventilating, she tried to explain that as I was frozen at the door handle and looked in the rear window and saw a man trying to crouch down behind the car. When she saw this, she wasted no time and got out of there as fast as she could, taking different random turns to make sure we weren't being followed. Long story short, our road trip was cut short and we found a hotel in the next town and crashed for the night. The next day we drove home without finishing our 3-day trip. A few days later, I started looking around online trying to find that pit stop and maybe call to complain about that employee, but when I called, an old woman answered and said she and her daughter were the only people working there for 2 decades. So to that creepy man who lied about working at that pit stop and your friend, let's never meet again. Drunk driving. I was on my way to a music festival with my friend Daxton. This festival was a 3-day event, so we would be camping there. We had left around 10 p.m. and the drive was to take 5 hours, give or take a few minutes. It was already dark by the time we left, and for the most part, we just played some of our favorite music while staring at the dark void, making out hardly anything on our drive. Eventually, Daxton fell asleep and I lowered the music, being left alone with my thoughts. I tend to already be in a dark mental space when left alone with my mind because I had just gotten out of a 6-month domestic violence relationship shortly before this encounter. So safe to say I was particularly on edge already. After passing through a few towns, we reach a stretch of land along the river with enough moonlight to see the surrounding area. Ahead, I spotted a car blocking my lane and decided to slow down just for everyone's safety. There was a white Honda Civic pulled up just in front, hazards on, of the car I had spotted in the distance. As I approached the 2 cars, I saw a couple who looked to be around our age, 22. I stopped to ask if everything was okay, considering it was midnight and the traffic was ghostly. They said they were okay and that they had just pulled up a minute or 2 before we had got there, then said the vehicle looked abandoned. I pulled up behind their car and turned on my hazards. Daxton had already understood the mission and got out of the car. The 4 of us approached the car while someone called the non-emergency line to report the vehicle. The operator said an officer would be there in 45 minutes and asked if we could stay until he arrived. We agreed. We started investing in this car. I don't know much about cars, but it's an old Jeep. Old enough to not have buttons, but switches for everything. If I had to guess, it's from the 1970s. It was crashed into the guardrail, but horizontally to the road. Everything glass on that car was shattered, excluding the windshield. Beer cans were present in almost every crevasse of the car. Grass was tucked under the car as if it had just driven through a field. We were careful not to touch anything in case this was some ongoing investigation. The weirdest part about this car, though, for being abandoned, was that the car was still running, with the key still in the ingestion. We all scattered to see if we could find anyone in a 20-foot radius, but nothing turned up but a duffel bag. We played it off as if someone was drunk driving and they had run to not get caught. We got acquainted with these new strangers, and after a bit of talking, I decided to take a smoke break from everything. I stepped 5 feet away from the Jeep and took in the beautiful view of the river. After maybe a minute, I started hearing what at first sounded like an owl. Up until then, everything had been lighthearted and we weren't too paranoid, but when I heard that sound for the second time, my heart stopped. I listened to see if I could hear it again. There was the same pitch, the same distance away. I yelled that I heard someone. Everyone ran to me and we listened again. I claimed that I could be paranoid, but that sounds like a person. The couple said they think it's just an animal and we should stay here. But Daxton believed me. He ran and said that sounds like a person. The 4 of us huddled together as if we were experiencing some sort of start to the zombie apocalypse. But reality kicked into me when Paxton said he found a shoe. I sprinted and there he was, lying face first into a ditch, gasping for every breath he had in him. I started calling 911 and took off my shirt to try to stop the bleeding. The girl we had met held the phone while I consoled him, trying to convince him not to get up. Every limb in his body was visibly broken. I choked back tears every time he lifted his head. His face was more recognizable as a bowl of spaghetti than a face, to put it less graphically. I promised him he'd see his family again, that he was going to be okay. I don't know how long this had gone on before the first officer arrived. He told us to keep up the good work and an ambulance would be there in 15 minutes. After 15 minutes of the same deep breathing and constant bleeding, 5 ambulances and 10 cop cars show up. They told us they got it from here and there was a helicopter coming down to take him to a hospital. We gave one of the officers our statement and they sent us on our way. Me and Daxton had 3 more hours to go on our trip and we didn't speak a word. We got to our camp at 4 a.m. We stayed up all day and the following night I took some Processin that was prescribed by my doctor for nightmares, for my previous trauma, and went to sleep. The next morning I got a call from the officer and he reported to us that the man we had found died on his way to the hospital. I cried for hours knowing that I had broken my promise to him. I've come to terms with this now as it has been 7 months since this occurrence. I never drank and drove in my life, but this has spooked me enough to get aggressively assertive with my friends about drinking and driving. I'm content with the fact that I tried to help and didn't just keep driving, but I still get nightmares about him. Still, hear his heavy breathing in the silence. I still hold so much guilt in my heart knowing we could have found him sooner. Knowing we could have helped him earlier if we weren't making jokes and laughing while he was dying 50 feet from us.